Hey guys, we just landed here in Seattle, Washington, our beautiful North Point, Washington facility. First of all, we just want to say thanks for joining us on this journey. Anything you want to say real quick, Big John?
Appreciate the support, and we got a lot of great episodes coming your way, so be sure to check them out, show us some love on all the different media platforms, YouTube, podcasts, all that good stuff.
Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes.
Absolutely.
Next few episodes are going to be showcasing our amazing North Point, Washington staff, as well as some of the alumni that have graduated from this facility, as well as North Point, Idaho, that live in the Washington State area.
Yeah, it's going to be a real good time,
guys. Welcome to No Way But North, where we talk about the miracles of recovery and the tools used to achieve them. My name is Cooper Lyons. My clean date is November 27th, 2010. And not, as always, I'm joined by Big John Meldrum.
I'm not going to do the next podcast if you say not, as always.
As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Big John Meldrum, a.k.a. Chocolate Bear, a.k.a. Black Paul Bunyan. That's one you like the most, right?
I just thought it was funny because Alex got such a kick out of it when I put it on there. Like,
that's right.
Nobody commented on my picture, and all of a sudden I get like Alex is like
crying, laughing face.
Funniest thing I've ever heard.
I wish we had a camera on.
What's the guy with the hammer? John Henry.
But he's not a woodsman. Paul Bunyan's way funnier because he's an accident.
That's Alex. For those of our religious listeners, you occasionally get an actual.
I feel like we need to get Alex over here one of these
Alex.
days, so people can see him.
One of these days.
He looks like a broke Magnum PI.
What is it? What is it?
Your camera up. You say some shit like that.
What is it about having Dan Labuda here that just makes you like?
Me and Dan are
totally derail the opening.
Me and Dan are bad for each other.
They have to keep us a state apart.
That's why we can't handle each other because we sit there and we just joke all day.
All right, guys. Well, this is No Way But North. I promise you. We are going to talk about the miracles of recovery, the tools used to achieve them, and not just berate Alex, our producer.
I love Alex. Me and Alex have a lot of fun together.
Guys, we're still here in Seattle, Washington, interviewing our awesome alumni and Washington staff. Again, we are meeting with Dan Labuda. We're having his clinical episode today. We're going to be talking about the stigma of addiction. But before that, I got to ask you to hit that like button, that subscribe button, that share button. Make sure we can share these tools, this education, this awareness with as many people as possible. We appreciate all your help. We couldn't do it without you, and we do it for you. So thanks for being here.
I love that we're getting a lot of pull from the videos now.
What do you mean pull?
I mean, like a lot of people are like people are coming into treatment and they're like, that was one of the motivating things to get me into treatment was like, I researched North Point and I saw,
or even addiction, and it came up.
Yeah. So like, it's really cool. Or like we're going to conferences, like counseling conferences, and like people are like, oh yeah, like you and Cooper and like
Big John Meldrum.
Big John Meldrum.
now
they're gonna call me Black Paul Bunyan.
So, and that's all thanks to you guys. We appreciate you. Please make sure you just keep sharing it and telling people that might be getting value out of what we're talking about here. We appreciate you. So, guys, the quote today is, "The deepest pain I felt was denying my own feelings to make everyone else comfortable." Nicole Lyons. That's why I picked it. She's got my last name.
Oh, God.
So when I was thinking about that, I just kind of, because we're talking about the stigma surrounding addiction, right? And it's kind of, I don't know how closely it relates, but it definitely made me think about it, right? Because when I first got clean, it wasn't something I did in addiction, right? Because addiction's super selfish. I don't give a fuck how you feel. I'm worried about what I need to do for myself. But when I first got clean, and there was some codependency there, and I was really worried about like making sure I'm walking on eggshells, being the best that I can be because I screwed my parents over. And I mean, that would last for 10 minutes, and then I'd go through a mood swing and then be a shitty person again. Right. But I think making sure that you're allowing, like, even if somebody pisses you off, you're allowed to get pissed at them. And then from there, like, it's up to me to be a responsible adult and come to a solution. So what do you think? God, he's going to make me read it twice. I thought we had got broken that with Dan Labuda's last episode.
No, because you didn't write it down.
The deepest pain I felt was denying my own feelings to make everyone else comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this idea. I think, I always tail it back to addiction in this realm, as I think we get stuck in kind of this idea sometimes people pleasing. And so what I think of is a lot of people don't want to come to treatment, don't want to get help, don't want to get clean, and they're doing it to appease other people, despite it making them uncomfortable. I mean, granted, there is some good that comes out of that. That's something they need to be doing. And, you know, for the most part, I think between North Point, Idaho, where I'm at, and Edmonds, where Dan's at, we use that as an opportunity to change people's mentality and change their thinking. But
plant that seed of recovery.
Yeah, planting that seed. So, I mean, people deny their feelings and deny what they want, but sometimes it's our job to make sure that they realize want versus need. Like, you want this, you don't need this.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
Follow that, Dan.
No problem. What it makes me think of, you know, as we're talking about stigma and stigma with addiction is one thing that I'm sure we'll talk about, but there's definitely stigma in society about sharing your feelings or not sharing your feelings. And, you know, by and large, a lot of people are really uncomfortable with people sharing difficult, you know, not necessarily negative, but difficult feelings like sadness, grief, guilt, and shame and stuff like that. And I think because of the stigma around like the genuine expression of emotions, it just leads people to keep a lot of stuff inside and to not be able to acknowledge what's really going on with them.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah. Perfect. Well, guys, like we've said probably 5 times now, we're going to be talking about the stigma around addiction for Dan Labuda's clinical episode.
What's so funny?
Just I've said stigma around addiction 10 times already, and we've been recording for 3 minutes. Addiction. So, kind of, what's your definition of stigma? How is it surrounding addiction? And what are some of the like detriments? How is it damaging to people?
To me, like the definite, and I have no idea what the dictionary says the actual definition is, but to me, it's how people act based on what they believe. Especially, you know, if you've got inaccurate beliefs about it. It's easier to talk about like the stigma around addiction than it is to just talk about the stigma or what stigma means. Like when I think about the stigma of addiction, like really what I think that it boils down to is people taking a point of view about addiction and treating either themselves as an addicted person or treating others with addiction, you know, based on inaccurate beliefs. I know that alcoholism and addiction is a disease, but this disease is viewed and treated much differently than we would treat anybody with any other disease. Yeah. You know, one of the things that you hear in addiction is sometimes people blame the victim. They blame the addict or the alcoholic for causing themselves to become an addict or an alcoholic because they didn't have good willpower or other, you know, external things or whatever.
They're weak.
Yeah, exactly. And you would never do that with any other disease, even diseases that, you know, where the individual has made lifestyle choices. Like, let's say somebody is a type 2 diabetic. That certainly can be influenced by diet, activity, a whole host of different things. But no one is ever stigmatizing people with diabetes, you know, because it's recognized as a disease. And so you just treat it objectively. But with addiction, it's stigmatized as a moral shortcoming, a lack of willpower, or any other, you know, reason that you can kind of blame the victim. And it does a disservice in a couple of ways for people with alcoholism and addiction. One is, you know, I think that having that inaccurate belief about what addiction is, you know, that causes us to sort of blame the victim, to be angry at the victim, to think that they've got low willpower and stuff like that, is it impairs people's recovery by projecting that inaccurate belief about what addiction really is. You know, if you believe that addiction is a moral weakness or something like that, if you just are a stronger person, then you can drink normal. But if you recognize that addiction is a disease that is caused by progressive change in your brain, then you look at recovery from addiction in the same objective terms that you would look at recovery from any other disease, and recognize that regardless of if you resolve the the other things that accompany addiction in life, whether that be chaotic family, whether that be low willpower or whatever. If you rectify those things, it's not going to fundamentally change your brain structure. You will remain an addict or an alcoholic. And the saying that I like is you can pickle a cucumber, but you can't cucumber a pickle. And by that, what I mean is, like, once your brain has gone through the process of adapting to addiction, resolving external factors isn't going to change the chemistry of your brain, but that stigma reinforces the possibility that at some point, if you just become a better person, a stronger person, a person with less stress in your life and things like that, then you can go back and drink.
For sure.
Would you echo that sentiment? Was there anything you add to that? I'm curious because you guys are both in the industry. You've experienced a lot of like the effects of stigma on people that are going through recovery or in recovery.
Yeah, kind of going back to what we talked about when we interviewed Brandon, just that idea of the stigma of what people think of when we see addiction, right? Mm-hmm. So when you think of a heroin addict, right? What do you think about when you think of a heroin addict or society? Right? You think of somebody's homeless with a needle in their arm, nodding off on a corner. Mm-hmm. When you think of a meth addict, you think about somebody that's 100 pounds and picking at their face and hasn't slept for 10 days.
Right. And you think about that person with disdain for that individual rather than as a victim.
But when we get into our field and with our facilities, like, granted, yes, we do see people like that, mm-hmm. but that's not the majority of what we see. Like, we see, working businessmen that have struggled with methamphetamine. We see moms that still raise children that struggle with heroin addictions. We see young adults that struggle with this. We see alcoholics that it's not the stigma of them sitting at a bar passed out. It's they're sitting at home drinking every day by themselves, still going to work, still doing these things. So I think by a society standard, the stigma is that when you hear addiction and then you hear those loaded words like heroin, meth, and crack and all those things, you think of, like I said with Brandon, like you think about the scum of the earth. You think they're disgusting individuals, and that's not what we see. That's not the stigma. That's what society and social media and media has portrayed people to think that addiction looks like. And I think that even going further, this idea when we talk about like these DARE programs, right? Like these drug fueled programs like DARE and Red Ribbon Week and all these other programs that have gone over the years. The thing is you have these programs showing the worst case scenario of what a meth addict looks like or what a heroin addict looks like. Mm-hmm. And they say, if you use meth or if you use heroin, this is what you will look like. And then people use meth and heroin or become alcoholics, and they don't look like the pictures. And so, like, this idea is like, well, then people are lying to us. And so, like, the stigma is that's not how it looks at all. And I think that has created people to look down upon addicts. And I think that makes it look like people don't want to get help because they're afraid of the title that will be associated with them. Because if I admit that I'm an addict or I struggle with a substance, then people are going to look at me like I'm disgusting.
They're categorized in the same way as the homeless, person with sores all over themselves and stuff. But like my thought on it though is the person that's homeless, the person that's just ravaged by addiction, homeless, sores all over themselves, underweight, engaged in crime and stuff like that, is victimized by the stigma as well, in that, like, that person is probably the receipt of more disdain from society for being more severely impacted by the disease of addiction, and so like it's the victim that's suffering worse that is viewed the harshest by society because of the stigma of what alcoholism and addiction is.
Yeah, and I think it's so damaging. The reason why it's so damaging is because of those things, people don't want to get help. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a barrier to people coming into treatment. One, for the person who is drinking at home and to some degree looking at admitting that they're an alcoholic or an addict which puts them in association with the people that are impacted by the disease the worst, the homeless people and stuff like that. Nobody would choose to lump themselves into a category of people viewed with such disdain by society. And so in that way, stigma is a huge barrier to people coming to treatment.
Well, and how many people do we treat? And like you hear them say, like I've gone to meetings before, but like I'm not like those people, right?
Exactly.
Like that, like my addiction doesn't look like what they're saying. Like I'm not homeless, or like I have a job, or I haven't burned through my life savings, or I'm not shooting up heroin. I'm only smoking it. So I think that because of the stigma that is surrounding that, it has damaged people's perceptions and ideals when getting help. And it, like you said, it creates such a barrier that people don't want to take that step. Because now if I take that step and I admit to it, now I'm categorized as an addict.
Yep.
So what's the solution? Because obviously there has to be a personal, especially for you guys as clinicians, right? Because I think like you grow up in the society and you see the things, right? The social media and media. There's no way to avoid that those stigmas get put into your brain at some point, and so you have to recognize them and address them. And then how do you do that on like at a public societal level?
It's difficult. Like personally, it's been a challenge even for me to change my perception of alcoholism and addiction. You know, when you are living in a society where stigma towards addicts and alcoholics is the norm, and you're raised that way, even when you go to school, like counselor school or whatever, and learn about alcoholism being a disease and work as a professional in the field, you still kind of grew up in that system that stigmatizes addicts and alcoholics. And so changing that is really, really difficult. And like my personal experience with that is, you know, I started working in this field when I was about 18 or 19 years old as a tech, and then became a counselor when I was in my early 20s. And then my mom ended up dying from addiction as well. And I remember, like, when my mom died, having anger towards my mom. You know, why didn't she get some help? Why did she drink herself to death? Why was she so weak? All of those things that, like, as a counselor, you know, I should know better than to think. But that's kind of my default reaction, because that's, you know, what I dealt with. The other thing that's really difficult about stigma, you know, if you accept alcoholism as a disease and view and treat addicts and alcoholics as sick people, it becomes a lot more difficult to blame the individual. And alcoholism and addiction causes a lot of harm to individuals, to wives, parents, you know, loved ones. We lie to our families, we hurt them, we let them down. And it causes a lot of harm to society as well. And that stigma allows us to blame the addict, and that gives us an outlet for our anger and
makes
our
them a
fear
scapegoat.
and things like that. It makes them a scapegoat. You know, so if you are dealing with an addict or an alcoholic and have to view that person as a sick individual rather than as a bad individual, what do you do with all that hurt and anger that you would want to project onto that addict and alcoholic for all of the harm that addiction has caused in your family or in your society?
I mean, I would even argue when you start looking at your own biases. I mean, I think a lot of one of the stigmas for the counseling realm is that just because we're counselors that we don't struggle with our own biases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So like, you know, Dan had his mother, I had my mom. You know, I've struggled with the idea, and for years, and even as a counselor, I understand what the disease model of addiction is like. I understand the concept. I understand that it is a disease, but it doesn't take away the biases and the feelings and the emotions that I had associated with the hurt and the lack of understanding when I was younger with what my mom did. And so like now within this realm, sometimes it's hard as a counselor to put aside those biases when I engage with somebody that has a similar story. Right? Or if I have like a female patient that is struggling with an addiction and has neglected children and stuff like that, it's hard not to let those biases and the stigma that's associated with being an addict, because in my mind, what I have to catch myself with is that you're not an unfit mom. You're struggling with something right now. And so I think a lot of times is, when addressing own biases, I think we kind of get caught up in our own emotions and what we're familiar with. And so when we see something that triggers us, right, our initial thing is to kind of shun that and be like, I don't like the way this makes me feel, and I push it away. And I think as a society standard, that's what they do with addiction, period, is that because people don't understand it, their first initial reaction is like, ooh, that's gross. I'm going to push that away.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to help that person. That person made their bed, right? Yes, it might have been their choice to engage in that behavior or that action. But, like, once they become addicted, like, they lose that ability, right? So it's hard to kind of get to a place where changing people's perceptions is because you still have a lot of people that are like, this person has chose to do this. This is their thing. If they chose to do this, they should choose to stop doing it.
Yeah.
So beyond, I mean, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, right? Beyond education, beyond raising awareness, beyond building community, how do we lower the stigma around addiction on a macro level?
I think having open dialogue about it, I think, the more that you talk about something, the more that you show something the light of day, the more people get comfortable with it. And it's like changing someone's perception of something isn't something that happens from you go to a lecture and all of a sudden your whole mindset about something has changed. It's something that's going to require ongoing reinforcement in the same way that it did with me. I had been working in the field of addiction recovery for 8 or 9 years or so when my mom died from drinking, and I still had some of that stigma. And throughout my career, I've looked at what my history was and what my triggers are and things like that, and hopefully work forward on that. But ideally, I think that what needs to happen is there just needs to be ongoing, frequent, kind of candid discussion about addiction as a disease over the course of years and years for people's attitudes about it to just gradually change.
Well, and I think more and more people are experiencing people like loved ones that go into long-term recovery, right? Because I think that completely takes away a large part of the stigma when you know somebody that, like, you only addicts are the guys on the street corner, right? And then all of a sudden, Uncle John, who were you talking about?
Yeah.
Right? Not you, but another Uncle John. And he's your favorite Uncle John, and he goes to rehab, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't even know he was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And then he comes back and he talks about it openly, and we encourage that. You gotta protect anonymity on some level, but at the same point, being able to talk to loved ones about that.
I do think that's a good point. And really, there might be no one that's a better advocate for reducing the stigma than people in recovery who have gone through it before. To some degree, I think part of the stigma of alcoholism and addiction is fear about like poor prospects for recovery, or thinking that addicts and alcoholics are chronic relapsers and don't ever achieve sobriety. And unfortunately, in my case, I got sober and I've been sober for quite a while. I just look like a normal person. So a lot of people wouldn't suspect that I'm in recovery. But if somebody like me or somebody who's got long-term recovery says, yeah, I'm an addict, this is what my addiction was like, and this is what helped, and I've had a great life in recovery, I think that decreases the stigma about it by kind of normalizing it and showing really that there is a good opportunity for recovery and for a normal life in recovery.
Yeah, I think a lot of fears that we hear with our patients is like, I don't want people to treat me differently now. And I think because there's such of a lack of education on what it looks like, we do have patients that go through our program and they start getting clean. And then when they enter back into their environment, people talk to them like they're slow. Like, are you okay? Do you need anything? And so, like, I think there's the
should I not say the word
should I
alcohol?
not? Yeah, there's just like all these things, but that creates a stigma within our patients, right?
Yeah.
With like, I don't want to share this. Like, I don't want people to know. I don't want coworkers to know. One of the things I do with my patients is like I talk to them and be like, listen, you need to let people know. Like, let people know if you're comfortable with it. Like, it's important to let people know that you've struggled with this, because unless you let people know, people will just keep treating you like you did when you were in active addiction. That's not going to change anything, and then you're going to be triggered, and then you're going to go back to those old behaviors. So I think it's kind of hard on both sides of changing people's ideas, non-addicts, changing their ideas of what addiction looks like. at the same time, letting our patients and people that struggle with addiction or are in recovery, letting them know that it's okay that you've gone through this. This doesn't make you a bad person. One thing I share in every group that I always teach when I'm doing the education, I say, like, we are not defined by the mistakes that we make, right? If every single person in this world were defined by the mistakes that we've made, every single person in this world would be a shitty person, right? Yeah. You made a mistake. You're doing something to change it, right? And that's the path you need to go. You need to stop looking at, like, everything that I've done. When you get to the chance and you get the opportunity to start making amends, then you make amends for those actions, right? That starts changing people's perceptions, because now people are looking at it and be like, oh, wow, I've done these things and I've gotten better because I've done these things and I've been open about these things. And I think that that's what will start to change people's perceptions within society and get away from that negative stigma. I will say addiction, mental health, we have made leaps and bounds over the last 15 years of what that was. Yeah. We have. We've gone, there's so many more resources, there's so many more tools. There's a lot more education, studies, all kinds of things that kind of secure this. But, like, I would say we're still another 10 to 15 years away from it being understood and accepted within a society standpoint more than what it is now.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, I don't know any other last thoughts other than kind of like what we need to, what would you say to people that are listening right now? How can they help expedite that 10 to 15 years, right?
I think a large part of it is, like, the fear of the unknown. You get somebody that is in early recovery, like, for instance, let's take a family, and they have a family member that is struggling with addiction. They go into this idea of this person has now gotten recovery and they're doing well, right? The education base, and that's one of the things I love about Ashwood, is we've created that family healing process and stuff like that. We give education to that family, let them know that, like, this isn't a scary thing. It's more scary for the addict going through this because they're so worried about everybody else's perception of them. And so I think that if we can continue to move forward and we're more open and we're more patient with people that are struggling with addiction, I think that that's going to further along the progress that we need. I think that will help out immensely when dealing in this realm.
Yeah, what I would say is, if you've got a loved one in recovery, just, like, make a decision to treat this disease, with the same objectivity, the same kind of judgment as you would any other disease. And it's not always going to be easy to do that. For recovering people, we have an opportunity to decrease the stigma ourselves by being open about our experience in recovery and talking about it without shame. And that's one of the things that we work on in treatment, is getting our patients to recognize a lot of the negative stuff that's gone on with addiction is because of the addiction. It's not that you're a weak person. It's not that you make bad choices. The disease affects your choice-making part of your brain in a way that contributes to making those bad choices. The more comfortable someone in recovery is owning their recovery and being comfortable with it, the more that kind of rubs off on people. Like, if someone comes out of treatment and they're sheepish and they seem ashamed that they've been in treatment, that's going to reflect on how people respond to them. It's going to project that addiction is something that is shameful. Yeah, exactly. But if you come out of treatment and say, yeah, I was in treatment, I had a problem, my drinking was affecting my life in this way, and addiction treatment has really helped me, and recovery is going well so far, and you're comfortable with that, that's going to affect the way that people respond to you.
For sure. Or even, I'm still struggling, but I'm working on getting it figured out.
Exactly. Exactly.
For sure.
I mean, I just kind of shut up and talked, or let you guys do all the talking. So, I mean, any last words? I know I kind of just asked you that.
This is our
your
specialty.
Yeah, that was great.
This is what we do every day.
guys, so I mean, take that advice. Make sure you hit that like button, that share button, that subscribe button. Help us end the stigma of addiction through this medium as well. Hopefully, that is what we're accomplishing when each new person kind of discovers this show and watches a few episodes. So, as well as that, make sure you tell one other person that you think might get value out of this. Once again, this has been No Way But North. We're talking about the miracles of addiction and the tools used to achieve them.
Miracles of recovery.
Miracles, did I just say miracles of addiction?
Yeah, she did.
Miracles of recovery and the tools used to achieve them.
Peace.
If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction, please call 208-999-4064. The views and opinions expressed in No Way But North do not reflect those of North Point Recovery or any other institution or organization.